Okay, we're at Pesachim 96. We have three main topics. One is someone eats the sacrificial parts when either most of the people are impure, or how about in Egypt, in the first Pesach, were they allowed to do that? That serves as a transition point to the next Mishnah, which is comparing the first Pesach they ever did in Mitzrayim to the way Pesach is celebrated every generation after that. Are all the laws the same or not? We'll see some of the laws are not, most of them are the same, but we were going to compare each one pasuk by pasuk. And then the next Mishnah will be replacement and substitute animals. What is their status? What do you do with them? So we begin with a question. Ba'erav Yosef dachakut teme'em etim v'achelu emurei Pesach haba betum'ah. When the majority of the community is tameh met, so then it's permitted to do the korban sacrifice for them, and they can even come into the azara, and everything is done bitumah. The question is, what if now they shouldn't be involved in the parts that go on the mizbeach? However, what if they do, and they go and they, over here it says eat the parts that are supposed to go on the mizbeach, and Abenu Chananela says touch. But almost all the manuscripts do say eat. So eat or touch. What will be their status? Normally, that would they would be liable to karet for making them tameh. How about in this case? Mahu since they're allowed to make the meat that they're eating tameh, are they also allowed to make tameh the parts that would go on the mizbeach and even eat them? Or they shouldn't, but would they not receive karet? Or do you say, okay, there were only the parts that they usually eat, that was permitted, but the parts that go in mizbeach, that was not permitted, and it was still get karet for that. Amar Rava mikdeh tumat emurin mehacha itrabe tumat basar dichtiv asher laHashem rabot et ha'emurin. He says, well, how do we even know that the parts that go on the mizbeach are prohibited from basar, right? Because it puts them in the same pasuk. So therefore, kol hechad itel letumat basar itel letumat emurin. Any kol hechad letel letumat basar leteh letumat emurin. Any time that there is a problem to make the basar tamed, then you also cannot do the parts that go in mizbeach. And only time that there's no problem with it, then there's no problem with the parts that go in mizbeach either. And so, while still prohibited, there was no karet for doing so. And last question, and what if Pesach Misraim hecha akterinu? This is a good question. You mentioned now the parts that go on the mizbeach normally, and so right, the kidneys, certain parts of the fat. How about in Mitzrayim? They didn't have an altar there. They didn't build an altar. They're on the run, right? What did they do with those parts? Good question. How do you know that? They didn't just roast them. There was no commandment yet to separate those parts, that fat. Maybe they roasted it and ate it like all the other parts. So that makes the most sense. Rav Yosef said that actually there were three mizbachot there, which was the doorposts and the lintel. In other words, they sprinkled the blood on the doorposts and the lintel. Usually you put the blood on the mizbeach. So for Pesach Mitzrayim, their doorposts were acted as the mizbeach. And so therefore, that's all they had to do is put the blood on there, and there was nothing else. There was no other altar. So it makes sense that they didn't do anything else with those parts of the meat. They just barbecued them and ate them. Okay, this is a very deep concept because it shows that in Pesach Mitzrayim, while every other year you do it in the Mishkan or later in the Bet HaMikdash, in that first one, their homes were transformed into a temple. So their doorways were the mizbeach. That means the people, right? All the people, all Bnei Israel, were actually like Kohanim. And so, even though with the Pesach Ledorot is different, even nowadays, this is a mitzvah that we do in our homes. And in a way, we're bringing that holiness into our home by eating the Korban Pesach, or nowadays matzah and everything else that we do in the home. So we should feel that special atmosphere of that holiness in the home on Pesach. Okay, next Mishnah. Ma ben Pesach Mitzrayim le Pesach Torot. What is the difference between year one and all future years? Pesach Mitzrayim mekacho mi be'asor v'taun hazah ba'agudat ezov. The first one, they had to go and take an animal on the 10th. Right, in the 10th of the month, and remember that was to show the Egyptians, look, we're taking these animals that you think are you worship as divine, and we're going to take them. Like, what are you doing with that? So that we only do the first year. In the future years, you don't have to take it from the 10th. And you have to sprinkle the blood with a bundle of hyssop. That's only the first year when you sprinkle it on the doorway, not future years. And put it on the doorpost. You don't do that in the future years. And it has to be eaten in haste. When only one night. So eating it in haste, that's only for the first year because they're on the run. And future times, you could take all night. Now, the last difference is strange because it says Mitzrayim, you do it in one night. Pesach Dorot Neheg Kol Shiv'ah. But then future generations, Pesach is for 7 days. Pesach meaning Korban Pesach. Now, this is not true, right? There is no Korban Pesach for 7 days. It's only for the first night. So in this way, it's the same. The Talmud will ask that question and just rephrase this a bit so it will make sense. Okay, now the first, now we're going to go through 9 different topics. The taking on the 10th we're going to show is in fact different, but all the other things that are mentioned in Shemot chapter 12, Shemot chapter 12 describes Pesach Mitzrayim. Shemot chapter 13 describes Pesach Ledorot. So all the items that are mentioned in Shemot chapter 12, we're going to ask about each one. Okay, this is mentioned in Pesach Mitzrayim. Does it also apply to Pesach Dorot? And we're going to say basically yes to all of them, examining it for 4 days, eating it at night. How about the other uncircumcised excluded? A stranger is excluded. Soujourner is excluded. Father of someone who's uncircumcised also cannot do Korban Pesach, and no breaking bones and no eating it raw. All these apply to the first year and to all future years. We're going to see in number 5 and 6, they interpret stranger and sojourner as an apostate. That's interesting. So we'll see that when we get there. Okay, so let's see how we learn each one. In chapter 12, it says on the 10th of this month, you have to designate an animal. So you see, this month you have to do it, but not in future years. Good. So that's how we learn to exclude it. Now that we set ourselves up for a difference, we kind of we made things difficult for ourselves, because once you have the word hazeh and interpret that to mean this is only the first year, but not in the future. Well, since it says hazeh, does that apply to the whole paragraph? And now everything in the paragraph is only for the first year and not for the and not for future years. So now we have to go and find a way to include everything else. Okay. The continuation, the pasuk 6 after that says, you'll hold on to it, you'll watch it for 4 days. Now, the watching it is not just to make sure no one steals it, it's to examine it to make sure there's no blemishes. So you do that for 4 years. So that for sure you have to do the first year. So maybe we'll say that this one does, but in future years, you don't need to do bikor because it says it only regarding this one, right? And it said the word zeh over here. Okay, it says it again here, zeh. It says again in this pasuk. So we might think that this applies only to the first Korban Pesach. How do we know that a korban tamid, right? So the daily sacrifice, every day, you have to go and make sure, right? Some animal doesn't have to be designated 4 days before, but whatever animal you think you're going to use, you got to check it for 4 days. Maybe something is visible only on one day, but not the next. So it says the word tishmeru, meaning watch, right? Guard to the animal to make sure it is safe from blemishes. And you do that for every day. And regarding Pesach, it says mishmeret, and there it says until the 14th. So the 10th to the 14th, that's 4 days. So look at that. See, the word zeh can't really mean only zeh, only the korban Pesach, or the first one is that you check for 4 days, because tamid also. So the zeh is not strict. Strictly only this one. So we answer sheni hatam dichtiv tishmiru. Now regarding the korban tamid, it says the word tishmiru, guard it, and also regarding Pesach Rishon, it says mishmeret, guard it. So that's why korban tamid does. But how about future generations? Well, it doesn't say tishmiru. So we might think that future generations, you don't have to guard it for 4 days. However, Pesach Dorot Nameh, you know what? We're going to include also future generations that B'Haketib, V'Abadetat Avodah Hazot, in chapter 13. That's where it's clearly talking about future generations. It says, do this service in this month, meaning now the second year, right? In future months, in future years, do the same service. This is going to be the key pasuk. We're going to quote this pasuk in every example coming, and all the rest of the 8 examples coming up. So this shows that they're always going to be the same. If so, if future Pesachim are the same as the first Pesach, and both of them you have to watch it for 4 days, then what do you do with the word hazeh? Okay, so this teaches shehu kol avodot chodesh zeh kazeh, that everything that you do in this month, in Nisan, the first year, you also do the next year. So elahu hazeh lema'uteh pesach sheni dechevateh. So therefore, the word zeh that came up in chapter 12 that says this month, you should keep it for 4 days. What's it excluding by saying this and not something else? It's not excluding future years, but rather excluding Pesach Sheni. So Pesach Sheni, if you didn't get a chance to do Pesach Rishon, that one you do not have to examine for 4 days. But Pesach Rishon, in every year you do. Ela me'ata dichtiv achilut habasar balayla hazeh. Okay, next example, it says you have to eat the meat on this night. So the word hazeh would seem to mean that only in the first year you must eat the whole thing at night. But in future years, you can eat it past the nighttime into the next day. I might think that from the word zeh, amar kera v'abadeta et habodah. But since it says that same pasuk as before, that the service, the second year will be the same as the first year. So now I know to include that also in the second year, you have to eat it all that night. Okay, if so, so what do we need this word hazeh for? That teaches us something that is not quoted here, but is cited in different places in Berachot 9. That's teaching you how long do you have to eat the Korban Pesach? And that's a machloket over there, where one Tana says until midnight, the other says all night, and they're learning it from the word hazeh. So that's why we need so we can define what the night is, but not applying to future years. Okay, next topic. This doesn't have the word zeh, but it has the word bo, which is also a limiting word, right? You see what's going on? Because in the first example, we said zeh is limiting only to the first year, not future years. Now, every time there's a limiting word, we're going to say, doesn't this apply to this year, first year, and not future years? So I might think, Pesach Dorot. Maybe an uncircumcised person may not eat the first year, but in future years, an uncircumcised person may eat. Amar kera v'abadeta. Therefore, right, the pasuk in chapter 13, this is the same as all years. Now I know. All years, uncircumcised person cannot join in. Ela bo lameli. So why does it say bo? Just say v'chol arel lo yochal. Debo eno ochel, aval ochel b'masar maror. It's to teach you bo. Someone who is an arel cannot eat Korban Pesach, but he may eat Masa and Maror. In fact, he has to eat Masa. Maror, the commentaries say, is not deoraita for an uncircumcised person. But Masa is Ela Me'ata. Next topic. V'chol ben nechar lo yochal bo. Right? A nechar is someone, a foreigner, right? Someone who lives elsewhere. He's just passing through maybe for business or some reason. And so he cannot join. So it says the word bo. So maybe we only exclude him for the first year, but not future years. In chapter 13 says it's going to be the same in all years. So why does it have a limiting word? Bo mishumadot poselet ve'en mishumadot poselet bitruma. So bo teaches that, see the ben nechad, a foreigner, or a stranger, we're now interpreting not as someone who's not Jewish, but also as someone who is Jewish, but who it was an apostate. In the printed editions, it says hamarat dat, someone who got rid of his religion instead of mishumad, apostate. This might be because of Christian censors that they thought the mishumadot means specifically someone who denies Christianity, maybe. Anyway, either way, this is to teach that an apostate may not have korban pesach, but he may eat teruma if he's a kohen. That's why it says, boy, he can't eat this, but there is something else he can eat. But anyways, regarding Pesach, there's no difference between all the years. You have to write both of these things, both an uncircumcised person and a foreigner. Why? If it only said regarding someone uncircumcised, I would say, oh, because he is repulsive. So, as from an external look-wise, that he still has his orla. Aval ben emala, but ben not. I mean, so this makes more sense if it's actually talking about a Jew. Maybe he even has circumcision. So from the outside, it looks fine. So that's why you have to include that also. And if I said just someone who is foreigner, meaning apostate, because he doesn't believe in heaven. His heart is not towards heaven. But someone uncircumcised might be in every other way very pious and religious. Some people just can't get a circumcision because of a medical reason, and it's dangerous for them. So they might be perfectly faithful otherwise, and nevertheless they cannot. So that since they're excluded for different reasons, we need both of them. Next example, right? Also, this sounds like it's referring to someone that came from a foreign country but is now a resident alien, right? He's now he lives in the state of Israel and in the country. And see, nevertheless, he may not eat it. So it says bo, so maybe I was schooled only the first year, but not future years. Well, the first year, did they have a toshav? Well, maybe like Erev Dav, other people that joined in and they took the opportunity while the Israelites were going free, they joined in and said, we want to go free too. Or maybe some people that they met in the desert. Anyway, whoever it was, I might think only they that first year cannot eat korban pesach, but in future years, perhaps those people can. Amar kerav abadeta. The pasuk from chapter 13 says, no, all years are the same. Ela bo lamali. So why does it say the word bo? Bo mishumadot poselet ve mishumadot poselet bitruma. So again, here we're treating the toshav and sachir, interpreting it as if it's talking about an apostate Jew, and to teaches me that they may not eat pesach, but they may eat teruma. Okay, this one is even stranger than the first because what does toshav and sachir have to do with mishumad? I can understand maybe nechad, that they're a foreigner, so this Jew is acting like a foreigner. But what do you mean he's acting like a sojourner or hired servant? So this is a little harder to explain. Rashi suggests taking this one out, that not having it and not reading it. But all the manuscripts that I saw do have it in. Anyway. So it looks like it's just a repetition. Ela me'ata. So anyway, next case, malta oto az yochal bo. The pasuk and back in Yud Bet says, when you circumcise for someone who's not, then he can eat it. And we understand this is not talking about the circumcised person himself, but rather the person who is responsible for circumcising, meaning his son or his slave. So that therefore, if someone has a child who he didn't circumcise, then the father also may not join Korban Pesach. So now I know that that's true regarding Pesach Rishon. Maybe future generations will be okay for the father to join in because it says bo. So again, the pasuk from Yud Gimel says no. Year 1 and year 2 are all the same. Ela bo lamali. So why does it have the word bo? Bo milat zecharav avadav me'akevet. Ben milat zecharav avadav me'akevet betruma. That a person who has a son or a servant who is uncircumcised cannot have korban pesach any year, but he may eat teruma even though he has a son or servant who's uncircumcised. Okay, ela me'ata dichtiv aisim lo yishberu bo. Okay, almost done with the list here. And so in chapter 12, it says you cannot break, actually, this is quoting from 9, from Pesach Sheni. Anyway, so saying that you cannot break a bone. Maybe that's only referring to the first year, but in the future years you would be allowed to break the bone. So in chapter 13 it'll say also the second generation is the same as the first. So why did it say bo? That the prohibition against breaking a bone is only if it's a kosher Pesach. But if it's a non-kosher, unfit Pesach, it became tameh, whatever, then you are allowed to break the bone. And so lastly, when in Shemot Yud Bet it says you cannot eat it raw, right? And mimenu mimenu is another limiting word. I might think only the first year they can't eat it raw, but in the future years maybe you could. Amar Kerava Badeta says no, it's going to be the same in all years. Ella mimenu lamali lechedrabba amar Rabbi Yitzchak. So mimenu comes to include something that Rabbi Rabban said in the name of Yitzchak. That he learned from here, this mimenu regarding maaser, that someone who is uncircumcised cannot eat maaser. So that's a different derasha that he has elsewhere. So that's what this mimenu is coming to do, to teach, but not to exclude any future years. And good. Okay, so now we got all the list of 9 things. And now we're going to go and how about the other difference that the Mishnah did say is different? That in Egypt they have to eat it in a hurry. Minalan, how do we know that? Because it says eat it in a hurry. Which is interesting. This law itself is interesting but they took the korban from the 10th, so they knew since the 10th that eventually this is going to happen. It's not like a last minute thing, like hurry up and wait, or just wait and hurry up. So why why is that? It seems to teach something about the nature of Geulah, that even though you were expecting it a long time, the redemption can happen in a second, right? A split second, all of a sudden now they go free, so they got to hurry up. So this teaches that this oto we do accept, right? This oto, meaning this one, the first year you have to eat it in a hurry. But in future years, don't hurry, right? Sit around, relax, sing, tell stories, and take your time. The last clause that we said was difficult. That said that the first year is you have to eat it that night, but in future years 7 days. What is it talking about? If it's talking about the korban Pesach, do we have a korban Pesach for 7 days? It's only the first day. Talking about chametz, you cannot have chametz for 7 days. Wait, so that if it's talking about chametz, then that would imply that the first Pesach they weren't allowed to have chametz only for one night, but in future times all 7 days. Which actually makes sense, but that's not quite accurate either. Rabbi Yosef assumed that in the first year that the prohibition of a chametz was the whole day, both the night and the next day, not only a night. And our Mishnah said just night. Anyway, how does he know that? Because it says don't eat chametz, and the next pasuk is today you are leaving, so it says hayom, that's a daytime. So rather, this is what it means. We're going to read the Mishnah as follows: Laila echad vehu adin the Pesach dorot. You have to eat the korban Pesach at night, both the first year and in all future years. V'chimutzo, but the prohibition of chametz kol hayom, the first year was 1 day, the night and the day. Pesach dorot no kol shiva, in future years it's for all 7 days. All right, very good. So we finished that Mishnah, and now the last Mishnah is going to be about replacement and substitute animals. To clarify, these are 2 different categories. So let's say you designated a Korban Pesach from a few days before, right? That's lamb number 1. And let's say it got lost. And so then you want to get a replacement, right? So a replacement would be the one that you actually end up sacrificing. So that might be lamb number 2. Substitute, the Hebrew is timurah. A substitute is one that I'm saying this will be like a clone of the one that was lost, of the first one. Now, there's a special law regarding timura that if you try to substitute one animal for the other, right, you think you're going to try to say the first one is going to become regular chol, and its kedusha will transfer to a second one. If you try to do that, it doesn't work. And when you do that, both the first and the second will have the same status. So that's a timura, a substitute animal, which is different from the replacement animal. So we'll see that we're going to talk about both of them here. אמר רבי יהושע, שמעתי שתמורת פסח קרבה ותמורת פסח אינה קרבה, ואין לי לפרש. Rabbi Yehoshua says, I heard two traditions, two teachings. One of them says that a substitute Pesach, right? This would be like if I took one Pesach and I say, one animal, I say, you know what, I don't want to do this animal, I want to change it for another one, right? A change. So I heard that the change you can sacrifice, but another tradition says that the substitute animal I may not sacrifice. And I cannot reconcile these two different traditions. So what's the deal? Amar Rabbi Akiva, ani afaresh. I have an answer for you. We're talking about two different cases. HaPesach shenimsa kodem shechitat HaPesach yir'eh ad sheyistaeb v'yimacher v'yabid b'damav shelamim v'chen timurato. Achar shechitat HaPesach karev shelamim v'chen timurato. It depends when you find the Pesach. So here's the deal. I had one Korban Pesach. That's lamb A. I lost it. And so now I went and got another lamb to be a replacement. That one I ended up sacrificing. Okay. Now it turns out that the first one, the one that I lost, let's say I found it. If I found it before I did the second one, that's Korban Pesach, then that first one is a problem because now I had two animals that are both fit to be Korban Pesach. I chose the second one. That means I rejected the first one. If I rejected the first one, then I can never use it again as a sacrifice, right? Meaning I can't even make it a shelamim afterwards. So what do we do with it? We let it go and graze until it until it gets a blemish, and then I will sell it, and with the money we'll buy shelamim in the future. So that's what happens to the animal one. Now, if in addition to those two animals, I go and get a third animal and I make it a timura for the first, I want to somehow, replace the first, or substitute rather, right? Then, of course, that doesn't work. And instead, both animal one and this new animal, the third one, they both get the same status. So since the first one, I found it before the time of Shechita and could have brought it as a sacrifice. And so now it has to go and graze. So too, the Timurah, I will have to go and let it graze. Okay, so that's the first tradition here. He said, that's the second one. He says, Ena kereva. And when would I make it kereva? If I lost the first Korban Pesach, I got a replacement and I did shechita on the replacement. Afterwards, I found the original one. So that can be offered as a shelamim, right? Because it was never rejected. It was lost. I had no possibility of giving it as a Korban Pesach. So since I found it after, I can make it a shelamim. Let's say I make a timurah, right? A substitute for that one that I lost. Now that I found it. Well, since the one that I lost, I can make a shelamim. So the timurah also, I can make that a shelamim. And so that's what it means here, that timurat Pesach kereva. So that's talking about two different cases. All right, now that we clarify that, the Gemara will ask, Velema Pesach karev or Pesach eno karev. So why is the tradition talking about a timurah? That, why are you complicating everything with a second substitute animal? Just teach the basic halacha that a Pesach, sometimes the first Korban Pesach is sacrificed. That's when it's found after the shechita, and sometimes it's not. That's when it's found before the shechita, and they're both eligible. Wouldn't that be simpler? Yes, it would be simpler. But we want to learn yet another halacha. Hakamash malan deika timurata pesach delo kereba. He wants to teach us another halacha that the substitute for the original Korban Pesach, there is a case in which it does not. You cannot sacrifice that. You might have thought otherwise. You might have thought, fine, the original Korban Pesach, if I found it before, I can't offer it. But this one that is a substitute, right, is just like secondary. And so maybe I would think that this would be a shalamim. So no, teaches has the exact same status as the original korban. Itmar. Now we're wondering at what when we say before shechita or after shechita, when exactly? Itmar. Rabba amar kodem shechita ulachar shechita shaninu. Bizera amar kodem chasot ulachar chasot shaninu. So the distinction here, whether you can offer that the first animal or not, depends on whether you found it before the actual time of slaughter of the second animal, right, that you use as a replacement, right? Your time slot was 2:30. So if you found it before 2:30, then the original animal you can never use again. If you found it after 2:30, then it's okay. So you go by the actual time of shechita of the one that you used as a replacement. Bizera says before or after the time that you are obligated. So if you found it before chatzot, that's the earliest time you can ever do korban pesach. Then you can then the first one. And you found it beforehand, then it could have been offered, so then it can never be used again. If it's after, then that original animal can be used as shilamim. So that's a bizera. Well, the bizera hakatane kodem shechita pesach. Wait, the Mishnah said before the shechita, and you said chatzot. So which one is it? Kodem ziman shechita pesach. No, he can interpret the Mishnah as meaning before the time of shechita, not before the actual shechita. And these two amoraim, Rabba and bizera, parallel machloket tanaim ketana pesach shenimsa kodem shechita yir'eh lachar shechita yikrav. Eliezer omer kodem chasot yir'eh lachar chasot yikrav. So they have the same law, and one says before shechita and one says before and after chatzot. So you see that they are parallel to those two amoraim. Okay, good. Now we're going to have a statement of Rava and a challenge from Abaye. We're going to have it in two versions. In the first one, Rava will answer the question successfully, and the second one, he will be rejected. And that'll be the conclusion of the daf. So let's see what his statement is. Amar Rava, lo shanu ela shenimsa achar shechita. He says the second clause of the Mishnah that says that you do not bring the animal if it's found after the slaughter, that you do bring it, right? So when do you bring it? Only when it was found after the shechita, and you bought the replacement, and you made the substitute after shechita. So you did shechita on the replacement animal, then you found the original one, and you also tried to substitute with another. So since both the finding and the substitute was done after shechita, both of those animals could never have been sacrificed, so they can be shalamim. But aval nimsa kodem shechita v'hamir bo achar shechita timurato mikoach kedusha dechuya ka'ata ve'lo kereba. But if you found the original korban before the shechita of the replacement, and then you made the substitute, even though you made the substitute after shechita, it's no good, because even though you're making the substitute and you're designating it after the shechita, and therefore you might think it's okay, because that animal itself could never have been sacrificed. No, but nevertheless, the substitute derives its holiness and its status from the original animal that was rejected, and therefore even the timurah cannot be sacrificed, has to go and graze, and you sell it. So that's Rava, and this is a machmir opinion. Iti Abaye challenges him from Vayikra chapter 3, which is talking about all general sacrifices. Im keseb, ma Talmud omar im keseb. Why does he have the word extra word im? Why don't you just say keseb? Lerabot timurata pesach hachara pesach shekereba shelamim. To talk about this case, that if you have a substitute for korban pesach, which you found after pesach, or just says after Pesach. It's not clear if you found it after Pesach or if you made it a substitute after Pesach. Could be both readings. Shekereba shalimim, that you do in fact offer it. Now, hechidami, which exact cases are talking about? If everything was done after you did shechita. So you found the original animal, so then that's fine, and the substitute would also be fine. Peshita, everybody agree. We don't need a pasuk to tell me that. Must be talking about this Rava's case, that it was found before shechita and then you substituted after, to teach that that is okay. And so this should be okay. And the Rabbah said that it's not okay. So what are we going to do with this? No, in fact, this pasuk is talking about when it's done afterwards, and you found it afterwards, and you did afterwards. And I know you said peshita. It's true. And actually, this is just a support. It's not an actual derivation. You see that when we say asmachta, it's not because it's difficult. It's a difficult reading, right? And so therefore, it must be only a hint. We only back into this because we say it's as a possible answer, because the halacha that you're going to learn from it is not true. So therefore, we have to say an alternative, which ends up being peshita. But we say no, it's okay if it's peshita because it's only an asmachta, and we do that just to save Rava. Well, if so, if this derivation of im and kesef is not because is only an asmachta, what do you do with the word im? Right? You see, this is a great proof that we're not bothered that you derive something from im, because okay, if you're not deriving this law because it goes against Rava, then you have to derive something else. So what else would we derive of it? Kedetanya keseb lerabot et pesach le'aliyah. So this teaches that even if you bring a lamb, that you also have to offer the fat tail on the mizbeach for Pesach as well. Even though regarding in Korban Pesach it doesn't say it, so we learn it from here. And Vayikra. Kesho omed im keseb, and here's the braita, right? The lerabot Pesach she'abra shenato. ושלמים הבאים מחמת פסח לכל מצוות שלמים, שטעון שמחה ונסכים ותנופת חזה vashok. So this is continuing and learning other things that we learn from this, that Korban Pesach that you could bring as a shelamim, right? Because you found it afterwards, and let's say Korban Pesach is supposed to be less than a year old. If it ends up being more than a year old, then you still bring it as a shelamim. But then it's treated as a shelamim for all things. You have to do semicha, and you have to bring wine libation with it, and you have to bring its breast and thigh. And those are things that you would not be true for a regular Korban Pesach. So you do have to bring this because now it's more than a year old. So it's treated as a regular shelamim. Okay. Now in Vayikra 3, the next paragraph says, fine, what if it's a goat? And then it copies all the same laws as the one that's a sheep. So like, why are you separating them into two paragraphs? What else are you learning about the goat that you wouldn't know about the sheep? Oh, because that the goat does not have a nice fat tail, so you don't have to bring that one on the altar, only for the sheep. That's why, as it has a repetition. Okay, all that was a tangent to see what the word im kesev means in that version. Okay, and according to that, Rava and the question from Bayeh, and we have an answer. So Rava's halacha stands. But there's another version in which Rava said that not about the second statement of the Mishnah, but about the beginning of the Mishnah. Ikadamat nila aresha hapesach shenimsa kodem shechitat hapesach yir'eh ad sheyistaev yimacher ve'bi damav shelamim vechen timurato. So if it's found before, the original one is found before the shechita, then it could have been offered as a sacrifice, and it was rejected. Since it's rejected, it can never be brought again. You have to wait until it grazes and then take the money. And also with something that is a replacement. You have to do that. So so he says this stringent, this prohibition is only if you found it before shechita, and I got a substitute animal before shechita, that would be a clone. Then it's no good. Both of them have to go and graze. But if even if I found it before shechita, but now I did the timurah after the shechita, so at the time I did the timurah, this new animal, I could never have been sacrificed. Therefore, it's okay. My ta'ama ki kaba'a shechita mideda hazile mideda hazile la kaba'a. Because when you say shechita determines the status of an animal, that's only an animal that was around the original Korban Pesach. that now was rejected. So at the time of Shechita, it's no good. But something that could not have been brought on the Mizbeach at the time of Shechita, and this animal at that time was just chulin, it was no status. So therefore, since I made it a timurah after Shechita, it never was rejected. So it's not an exact clone, right? Even a clone could be a little bit different. So this version of Rava is more lenient than the one before. Abaye has a problem with this. Im keseb ma tamud lomad lerabot timurat haPesach achad haPesach shekereba shelamim yachol af lifnei Pesach ken tamud lomad hu karev ve'en timurat haPesach kereba. Right, so Abaye this is a little different now, right? That im keseb. What does that word im come to teach? That comes to include a substitute Pesach after Pesach, that it will be also be a shelamim. So the substitute is okay. Well, what if it was found before Pesach? That's why he says who, only a regular one, but not the timurah, not the one that's a replacement. So you see, this is a prohibition. Now, what case is it talking about where a timurah is no good? If it was found and designated as a substitute both before Shechita, Peshita obviously wouldn't be good. The Pasuk wouldn't have to teach me that. Must be that was found before, and now the substitute was done after Shechita, and yet it is still no good. And tiyubta de Rava tiyubta, and that is a rejection of Rava. So Rava is rejected, but only one version of what he said. So that's kind of interesting to reject him, even though we're not sure if he said this or the opposite. So it would have been nicer to bring it the other way around. That way we could have revived him instead we end on a tiyubta. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.